All right, so if I look at my layers, if I turn off my sketch, this is the logo I have so far. Obviously, there's stuff that has to be taken care of here. I'm going to do that with the eraser tool. As long as I know which layer is which, I can erase from it safely. I need to continue with my blob brush and ink the ground here. I'm going to show you how you can just duplicate something you've done. So instead of using the blob brush on the same layer I've done all my other inking, I'll make a new layer, and then I'll just do a nice hand-drawn arc. And there's a few reasons to do it that way. Now I can use the large selection tool because every other layer is locked. I can easily select that mark I made and rotate it. Right. I can also do things like, I love that mark I made, but I want it to be thicker. And so instead of painting it with a higher pressure, I can add a stroke to it. So I can have both a fill and a black stroke. Right? And then I can increase the stroke size until it's the thickness I want. So let's say it's about that. You can also do points. So if I wanted 3.7, I can get that. So it's not just whole numbers or whole integers for your strokes. Now, how do I make that stroke and fill all one fill? Well, I select it, and then I go to Object, Path, Outline, Stroke. And then I have to merge them together with Pathfinder. And now it's all one thick stroke, right? Now I can take that and I can copy it, Edit Copy, or Command C. And I can do Edit, Paste in Place, or Shift Command V. And then just use my arrow keys to move it perfectly down. So this is going to kind of complement my circles, my dual circles, by having these dual marks be exactly the same, just scaled slightly differently, and inset a little bit. And I can see how that looks. Turn off my sketch layer. Right. And then I need this little Superman shield kind of shadow thing. And I'm going to do that on a new layer. So I'm going to lock that layer. This is all organizational. And now try to, with my blob brush, take a deep breath, be kind of zen about it, and ink. The one thing I regret about Illustrator is I can't tilt the whole canvas, right? In Photoshop, you have a tool you can tilt it so you can do like inking passes. And this is a tough curve to do, but it can be done. And remember, with the blob brush, you can pick up and stop anytime you want, and it will continue. Some of its advantages beyond the brush tool. And it's just previewing it for you. It will smooth it for you once you've let go. Right. Okay, so now I've got all my major elements in. Let me turn off my sketch. But now I need to do some erasing, right? So I go selectively through my layers. Now I'm going to erase from my circle layer. So I make that the only one that's unlocked. And that way the eraser tool, I don't even need to select a certain path. The eraser tool is only going to affect the one path that is unlocked, right? I want to clean up the width of this. So I'm going to lock my circle, go to this layer, unlock that, go to the pencil tool, hold down Command, select it, taper this curve down. That's too much. I have to start through an anchor point, remember, and end through an anchor point. And then you can smooth it. Or in this case, I can just go to the pen tool, delete anchor point tool, just get rid of this anchor, and then use the small selection tool to adjust that Bezier handle to get the curve I want. The pencil tool. So all those pen tools are helpful for just kind of spot treatments and corrections, even though they don't feel very hand-drawn or expressive in the moment. Okay, I look for rough edges, and I use Command, and I use the pencil tool, set with Smooth on it to clean it up.
Use Command. Why use Command?
Command is just a shortcut when you're in a tool like the brush or the pencil to get to a selection tool. And you need that because you need to be able to see the anchors before you can modify. Otherwise, you're just drawing a new path. So my theory of using Illustrator, and this is because I mostly work with raster images, my theory of using Illustrator is give yourself a lot of content and then modify it, as opposed to trying to get it exactly right from the beginning. But I suspect there are many logo designers that are more comfortable in Illustrator than Photoshop, and I've had a few as students, and their approach is just use the tools and make the exact shape you want from the very beginning.
How come I'm trying to erase,
Uh-huh.
and it's showing me that I'm erasing, and then when I let go of the pen, it comes back?
It's because, let me show you that. That's a great question. So if I use the eraser, watch what happens. I'm gonna have only this layer unlocked, right? And I'm gonna erase, and it looks like it's erasing everything, right? But it will come back because all the layers that I actually erased from are locked. So the eraser will work on any layer that's unlocked.
Well, I had to redo mine, so I only have one layer.
You can go in and individually lock or unlock paths. So if your whole layer is unlocked, you still might have paths within it which are individually locked. So use the little drop-down arrow on the layer, and you'll see if any of the individual paths within it are locked. So next to where it says layer and next to the color, those arrows will show you all the paths within that layer.
Oh, yes, of course. You showed me that before, but
Yeah, no problem. And that's why I really like to lock as I go, because that's the biggest problem I have with Illustrator, is knowing what I'm affecting. Okay, so now I need to kind of clean this up. And so you see how the layer organization helps. I don't want to accidentally affect these lines while I'm correcting this flower stem. So I have them on separate layers, and I have the other layers locked.
so my question is, how do I know I have to go through each of the layers to figure out where I'm at in order to erase?
I'll come and see what the setup
I'm
is.
sorry.
Yeah, no problem. And I think you guys are starting to see why the pen tool is or the pencil tool is my favorite. Because it can do most of the things you want it to do. As long as you can see the anchor points, you can clean it up with the pen tool. Now this is getting to a pretty high level of being picky. You know, finding this curve and smoothing it out. But in real logo design, that's how it is. And then if I'm being really picky, I would select this one and erase it, have everything else turned off, right? Take the size of my eraser way down and erase it only where that overlap happens. And it looks like I'm erasing everything, but it's only going to erase on the unlocked layer, revealing that part. All right, let me pause it. So I'm very close to being done with this. There's little things. It's very popular for logos nowadays. It's kind of a trend since the 2000s to have a little bit of an organic hand-done approach to logos. So it's not bad to have everything be, you know, a little wonky in places, as long as you feel like you have control of it. But often, kind of the old school way of doing logos is to have everything perfectly controlled and clean. And so one of those aspects is symmetry, I need to unlock this stuff in order to be able to do it. So I showed you how you can do copies, and you can use the large selection tool to scale and to rotate, how you can use the shape tools for like these perfect circles, but I played with the different widths to give it a little bit of an organic feel. But what if I wanted this little bud here, this little flower bud, what if I wanted it to be perfectly symmetrical, not just a hand-drawn shape? How can you do perfect symmetry in Illustrator? Because it's hard to freehand. So I'm going to show you how to do a shape. I'll make it an acorn shape. I'll do it on a new layer on top. Notice everything else is locked. I'm just going to use the blob brush, and I'm going to try to freehand 1/2 of an acorn. I'm thinking of it as an acorn. I don't know what it is. And then I want to show its crown. Right, something like that. Now, just like in Photoshop, if I hit Command R, I'll get rulers. I can toggle them on and off. And if I use one of the selection tools, I can put guides in. So I'm going to use a guide to find a vertical that hits everything I did. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is use the large selection tool. Notice everything else is locked. And select what I drew. And now I'm going to copy it. Edit, copy. Then I'm going to say edit, paste in place. That's just like duplicate in Photoshop. And so it didn't look like it did anything, but it created an exact copy in the path for me. And you'll notice that the guide is now part of that layer. And the guide can be turned on and off just like a path. And now with just one of those, this one on top, I'm going to go to Object, and I want to transform it. Object transform. And this is exactly like flip horizontal in Photoshop, but of course it's not called that in Illustrator. They have a different history. So what I'm looking for is reflect. I want to make a reflection. And I want to reflect it on the vertical axis, like a mirror standing up. And that's the horizontal flipping. So it's a little confusing. When I do that, it flips it, and then I can just use my arrow keys so I don't accidentally let it travel up or down, and mirror it so I get exact symmetry right on that guide. But notice they need to overlap a little bit. So I find where I have a good overlap, right? And then I click off and deselect, and I can say, okay, I want them to be a little bit closer, but this is the nicest curve. So I'm going to move my center, take my path, or my guide rather, or make a new one that finds the new center. And now it's all perfectly symmetrical, but it's not perfectly perfect yet. So before I merge them, I want to see what corrections need to be made. That little bubble. And now once I know what corrections need to be made, I select all of them, all these overlapping paths, and I go to Pathfinder, and I merge so that they're all one. And then I can go in and modify them. And if I want to be really exacting, I will use the pen tool on both sides. And one of my favorite things is just deleting these extra anchor points that I don't need. And then using the small selection tool to take down this handle. And I can do that exactly the same on both sides. So you notice I'm not having to free draw anything to get something that's absolutely symmetrical, which is what some people want from logos. Absolute symmetry. And you can toggle your guides on and off with Command semicolon, just like in Photoshop. Now, when you're doing symmetrical logo design, you'll end up with a ton of guides. So it's important to be able to turn them on and off so you can actually see what you're doing. Now, how might I use something like this in a logo? Well, I have this nice organic logo here, This is what I love about vectors.